Hours ago, Vice President Kamala Harris officially conceded the 2024 election to Donald Trump. But she did not concede everything.
While I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign. The fight for freedom, for opportunity, for fairness, and the dignity of all people. A fight for the ideals at the heart of our nation, the ideals that reflect America at our best. That is a fight I will never give up.
There are a lot of people experiencing legitimate pain and sadness and fear right now. English writer Evelyn Waugh once wrote about a blow expected, repeated, falling upon a bruise, with no smart or shock of surprise, only a dull and sickening pain, and the doubt whether another like it could be born. And after 2016 and its aftermath, that sentiment for maybe half of this country or more feels about right. Here we go again. Donald Trump now has a real shot at winning the popular vote. He is currently leading by 6 million votes. Republicans are projected to take control of the Senate, and they are the odds-on favorite to take control of the House of Representatives. How did this happen? Well, as we try to begin to answer that, one of the best assessments I have read of the current political climate came from journalist James Pogue in Vanity Fair earlier last month. Pogue wrote a profile about Steve Bannon and the movement he and Trump have built on the American right. In the piece, Pogue identifies some of the central motivations in the MAGA movement. Motivations like a yearning for traditionalism. If you followed this election closely, you know what I'm talking about. You've seen the term trad tossed around to describe a movement of conservatives who want to return to what they consider traditional American values, one centered around a very retrograde version of the American family. We saw this vision of America violently and angrily and bizarrely boosted by Tucker Carlson when he described America as an anxious teenager waiting for her father figure to come home and spank her.
There has to be a point at which Dad comes home. Yeah, that's right. Dad comes home. And he's pissed. When Dad gets home, you know what he says? You've been a bad girl. You've been a bad little girl, and you're getting a vigorous spanking right now. And no, it's not going to hurt me more than it hurts you.
It was dark, and it was strange, and it was meant to appeal to men, including and especially white men, which, as the results of this election make clear, it did. But they were not alone. White women broke for Donald Trump by an 8-point margin, and Latino men broke for Trump by a 12-point margin. They, at the very least, were not put off by this vision of America as a rigid and sometimes violent patriarchy. They maybe even supported it. People like Steve Bannon and J.D. Vance and Tucker Carlson, the people who have worked to craft Trumpism into a coherent philosophy, they have sought to associate the loss of this kind of so-called traditionalism with the loss that many working families feel in a globalizing economy. To them, the end of a male-dominated household and the struggle to get by financially, well, those are natural partners. Even before the pandemic, American middle-class wages were stagnating. And the very real loss in purchasing power caused by the pandemic gave the Bannons and the Vances of the world something to point to as justification for this belief. This is not to say that so-called economic anxiety can explain away our country's embrace of racist and sexist demagoguery. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Economic anxieties are a key part of an ideology that bemoans the loss of white male power, even as macho white dudes continue to dominate our politics. In exit polls, white men without a college degree supported Donald Trump over Kamala Harris by 40 points. Voters, including men and women who had served in the military, went for Trump over Harris by 31 points. To that end, Pogue identifies another factor that I think motivates the MAGA movement: the reassertion of a white male warrior class. As Pogue writes, you'll often hear in conservative circles that America's warrior class, which on the right is often believed to be from ethnically Scotch-Irish, disproportionately Southern families who treat military service as family heritage, that they have been the ones who bled to build our empire and ended up with NAFTA, fentanyl, and a coastal establishment that sees them and their values as backward and dangerous. That was a key part of the message crafted by Trump acolytes, a way to weave together concerns about status loss and immigration and drug abuse and American militarism into a eulogy for American toughness and an attack on the so-called ruling class that is blamed for its demise. Here was J.D. Vance during his acceptance speech at the Republican National Convention.
Things did not work out well for a lot of kids I grew up with. Every now and then, I will get a call from a relative back home who asks, "Did you know so-and-so?" And I'll remember a face from years ago, and then I'll hear they died of an overdose. As always, America's ruling class wrote the checks. Communities like mine paid the price. For decades, that divide between the few with their power and comfort in Washington and the rest of us only widened. From Iraq to Afghanistan, from the financial crisis to the Great Recession, from open borders to stagnating wages, the people who govern this country have failed and failed again. That is, of course, until a guy named Donald J. Trump came along.
Again, I am not endorsing any of this worldview. But it is important for us to understand how the Trump campaign managed to point to real problems and then position Donald Trump as the solution to those problems, how they turned an issue like immigration into a proxy for all of society's problems. It goes a long way in explaining why Donald Trump is going to become this country's 47th president. And it's how Donald Trump and his allies were able to undermine some of the most optimistic parts of the Harris message. For instance, there was this idea promoted by both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris that America is an aspirational project. This was how Kamala Harris put it in her closing speech on the Ellipse.
The United States of America is the greatest idea humanity ever devised. A nation big enough to encompass all our dreams, strong enough to withstand any fracture or fissure between us, and fearless enough to imagine a future of possibilities.
To a lot of people, that sounds really patriotic, the kind of message you would expect someone who has "proud to be an American" on their Spotify playlist to understand and embrace. And yet it is precisely the thing that MAGA leaders seized upon as evidence of a threat to the white Christian ethnocracy that they seek to return to. As Steve Bannon told James Pogue, America isn't an idea. It is a country. It is a people with roots, spirit, destiny, and what you're talking about, the liberalism and the globalism, real American people are the victims of that. Now, most voters were not listening to Steve Bannon's fevered ranting about liberalism and globalism, but they heard one candidate talk about America as a virtuous experiment in self-governance, and they heard the other candidate call America a garbage can, and a majority of them sided with the guy calling this country a garbage can. Which brings me to the final element of this election that is probably worth examining: the cultural realignment between the left and the right over American institutions. Trump's just massively destructive first 4 years in office forced the American left to become defenders of institutionalism. Democrats had to speak up for law and order and for peace and stability and for democracy. And that was why people like Liz Cheney and her father Dick Cheney, among a handful of otherwise really quite conservative people, it's how they became unlikely partners with Democrats in the fight against Trump's dangerous vision for America and for the world. It was the right thing to do, but it had a political cost. For most of my life, the American left was the side channeling legitimate frustrations with American institutions. Democrats were the ones who pointed out how innocent people could get caught up in America's criminal justice system. Liberals and progressive were the ones who called out abuses by the CIA and by America's military-industrial complex. But the realignment that happened under Donald Trump meant that Democrats had to cede much of that righteous outrage to Republicans who were trying to tear all of it down. And voters who felt frustrated by those issues found their way into Donald Trump's coalition. As former Obama foreign policy advisor Ben Rhodes told James Pogue, I think the innovation of the Bannon and Vance project is that it's forced the left to become defenders of the very institutions they're supposed to be skeptical of, like the CIA, like the broader intelligence community, like NATO. Or as Joe Rogan put it in his interview with Trump, that is how Republicans became punk rock.
The rebels are Republicans now. They're like, you want to be a rebel, you want to be punk rock, you want to buck the system, you're a conservative now.
Again, I don't say any of this to endorse these ideas or to chastise anyone, least of all Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, who displayed remarkable and responsible leadership of this country during just enormously troubling times. A lot of you listening to this program, including me, would like to not have to think about anything Donald Trump or Steve Bannon or J.D. Vance or Joe Rogan have to say about our country or its people or its place in this world. But in order to do that, in order to reach a point where these people are once again far away from the levers of power in this country, we have to begin by understanding how they got there in the first place.